I was 34 years old the week I learned what my parents thought my signature was worth: $100,000, three attorneys, and a private room they booked under someone else's name. I audit estates for a living. I know exactly what people are worth on paper, and I know exactly what they think they're owed. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Have you ever had a family member look at your grief and see a business opportunity? Let's talk about what happens when you decide to audit their love. My father, Raymond, built a commercial development firm on a foundation of leverage and hidden debts. For years, I functioned as the silent investor in his version of family. When his heavy equipment loans came due, it was my quiet, steady income as a senior forensic estate auditor that balanced his ledger. I subsidized his endless financial oversights without a word. That was the contract. In our family system, financial exploitation was not an anomaly. It was the absolute baseline. This is the trap of cruel normalization. Toxic family structures do not announce their intentions with grand malice. They operate like a slow, systemic tax on your sense of self-worth. They groom the most responsible child to treat systemic exploitation as a fundamental obligation. You are meticulously conditioned to believe that keeping their ledger out of the red is the only way to maintain your subscription to their affection. Meanwhile, my 24-year-old sister, Haley, enjoyed complete financial immunity. She was the deeply entitled golden child, a highly protected asset whose extravagant excesses were continuously insulated from the harsh realities of consequence. My only refuge from that constant deficit was my husband, Julian. Julian was 36, a master restorer of antique church stained glass. He lived in a quiet world of fragile history, a man of hyper-protective and methodical precision. He worked with shattered, delicate pieces, understanding exactly how much structural pressure a framework could take before it broke. He applied that exact same meticulous care to me. He analyzed the unequal balance sheet of my family and silently set about teaching me the architecture of self-defense. Julian did not demand love. He demonstrated it through absolute, unyielding consistency. Then, the consistency stopped entirely. Julian's sudden passing was a structural collapse I could not have audited or prepared for. When the end came, I did not break down in hysterics. I did not scream at the universe or ask why. Anger was not loud this time. It was strictly clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. I stood in our kitchen and stared at the single unwashed coffee mug he had left on the counter. It sat there, a quiet, fragile monument to my absolute loss, a final timestamp of the quiet life we had built together. My grief was a locked vault. It was a ledger I intended to manage alone, with quiet dignity and absolute precision. I expected the standard grace period to process the deficit. I expected silence. But a parasitic system does not recognize grief. It only recognizes opportunity. My family looked at my profound loss and did not see a widow. They saw an open line of credit, newly funded and ready to be drawn against, and they intended to collect exactly what they felt they were owed. The personal warfare began exactly 11 days after Julian's funeral. 11 days. That is 264 hours of mourning before my mother, Amanda, decided it was time to collect. She initiated a phone call that entirely bypassed standard grief protocols. There were no gentle inquiries about my well-being. There was no motherly comfort. She opened the conversation with a raw balance sheet. Haley had selected a historic, elite venue in Boston for her upcoming wedding. The location demanded a $100,000 cash advancement to secure the date. Amanda did not ask if I could assist. She informed me that this sum would be extracted directly from Julian's life insurance policy. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at Julian's unwashed coffee mug, and let the silence stretch across the line. I did not cry. I did not ask how she could be so heartless. I simply opened my laptop and started a new spreadsheet. When my silence extended a second too long, Amanda weaponized my loss. "Brooke, you don't need all of it," she stated, her voice perfectly steady. "Julian is gone. Haley is starting her future. It is only fair that this money goes toward the family's next chapter." Love had always been a contract in this family, but now I realized it had been a subscription, with me footing the bill. I refused to break my composure. I did not escalate the argument or plead for basic human decency. Instead, I quietly logged the conversation into a secure document on my phone. I recorded the exact professional timestamps. Call connected at 2:14 in the afternoon. Threat issued at 2:16. I will review the numbers, I told her, my voice devoid of any inflection. I will let you know what is available. I ended the call at 2:18. I did not slam the phone down. I placed it gently on the table. Exactly 4 minutes later, at 2:22, my father Raymond escalated the campaign via text message. Your sister needs this, the message read. We have always supported you. Refusing to help your sister right now violates basic family loyalty. Do not be selfish with money you did not even earn. We expect the transfer initiated by the end of the week. I took a screenshot of the text. I uploaded it to the same secure folder. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. They were not shocked by their own audacity. They were entirely comfortable demanding a widow, finance a party with death benefits. They expected me to simply absorb the cruelty, sign the check, and continue my role as the family's silent investor. But anger wasn't an emotion anymore. It was an audit. I closed the laptop, my breathing perfectly even. The grief had been compartmentalized. The retaliation was now strictly clinical. They had requested a financial transaction, and I was going to give them an absolute reckoning. The following morning, the front buzzer of my apartment sounded. It was Haley. She arrived completely unannounced, breezing past the threshold with an oversized tote bag and a blinding smile. She did not offer condolences. She did not look at the framed photo of Julian in the hallway. Instead, she immediately unpacked a stack of premium tablecloth swatches, spreading them across the very kitchen island where I had sat paralyzed by grief just hours before. She treated the $100,000 contribution as a settled transaction. I am torn between the ivory silk and the champagne linen, Haley announced, holding up 2 pieces of fabric. Mom said the transfer should clear by Friday, so I went ahead and booked the premium lighting package too. You are literally a lifesaver, Brooke. I looked at my 24-year-old sister. I looked at the champagne linen in her hands. I did not scream. I did not flip the swatches onto the floor or demand she leave my home. I refused to escalate emotionally. Emotional responses represent a loss of control, and I was entirely in control. I need to finalize some paperwork with the estate, I said evenly. The funds are currently structured in a specific way. Haley rolled her eyes, annoyed by the logistical delay. Well, just expedite it. The venue needs the deposit. She packed her swatches back into her tote bag and left as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind nothing but the faint smell of expensive perfume and the absolute confirmation of her entitlement. Action begins immediately after the trigger. Proactive, not reactive. The second the door clicked shut, I picked up my phone and contacted Vance. Vance was a 58-year-old clinical trust specialist, an elite attorney Julian had retained. He was a man who spoke exactly how legal documents read, devoid of sentiment and focused purely on asset preservation. I requested an emergency meeting. 2 hours later, I walked into his clinically sterile downtown office. The glass walls offered a sweeping view of the Boston skyline, a sharp contrast to the suffocating demands of my family. I sat across from Vance's heavy mahogany desk and handed him my phone, displaying the time-stamped logs of Amanda's call and Raymond's texts. Vance reviewed the data in absolute silence. He adjusted his glasses, his expression betraying nothing. Then, he opened a thick, secured file box resting on his desk. Your husband, Vance, began, his voice perfectly measured, operated with total legal foresight before his death. Julian was a methodical man. He anticipated this precise scenario. I sat perfectly still. What did he do, Vance? Julian recognized that your family viewed you as a limitless asset, Vance stated. He spent the last year of his life ensuring that the moment he was gone, your vault would be permanently sealed. He slid a heavy stack of documents across the desk. This isn't revenge, Brooke. This is accounting. And your husband was an exceptional auditor. Vance opened the first folder and systematically laid out the lethal secondary twist. Julian had not built his legal shield out of random paranoia. He had built it entirely out of hard data. Vance pushed a series of bank records across the desk. 6 months prior to his passing, Vance explained clinically, Julian conducted his own audit of your joint finances. He discovered that your father's development firm was severely overleveraged. More critically, he found this. I looked down at the highlighted document. It was a loan application attempting to borrow heavily against the equity of our joint Boston home. At the bottom, bearing a crude but deliberate imitation, was Julian's forged signature. Raymond had actively attempted to commit financial fraud against his own son-in-law to cover his hidden debts. Your father attempted to extract leverage directly from your marital assets, Vance said, his tone as cold as winter glass. In direct, decisive response to this criminal forgery, Julian engineered an airtight spendthrift trust provision. I traced the line of the forged signature. I didn't ask why my father would do this. I just digested the clinical reality of the betrayal. Vance read the trust clause aloud, enunciating every syllable with lethal precision. If a single dollar of this estate is ever gifted, extracted, or coerced by any member of Brooke's extended family, it triggers an absolute forfeiture clause. The entirety of the multimillion-dollar estate will be immediately rerouted to a stained glass conservatory foundation. You are legally barred from yielding to their demands, Brooke. If you sign over $100,000, the trust vaporizes. It was a masterpiece of legal architecture. Julian had built a glass fortress around me, insulating me from my own conditioned sense of obligation. If they pushed me, the money disappeared. They had zero leverage. The absolute forfeiture clause was bulletproof, Vance continued, sliding the final page toward me. Your father has stripped away any moral or legal baseline he ever possessed. Your husband ensured that any attempt they make to manipulate you financially is effectively a self-destruct sequence for the very funds they seek. Vance reached into the back of the file and pulled out a single, sealed envelope. He asked me to give you this when the time came. I opened it. Inside was a final 4-sentence letter from Julian. It read, "They will try to collect a debt you do not owe. You are not their ledger, Brooke. And you are worth more than their bottom line. I have locked the vault. Close the account." I folded the letter and placed it carefully in my bag. The anger had completely crystallized into strategy. The grief over Julian was still a quiet ache, but the retaliation against my blood was cold, methodical, and ready to be executed. We are about to step into the room where the trap was sprung. Before we do, if you believe that boundaries are a form of self-defense and not malice, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's ensure your own vault is locked. 2 days later, I accepted an invitation to what my mother described as a healing reconciliation dinner. The setting, however, was strictly calculated to intimidate. The location was a soundproofed VIP dining suite inside an elite, private Boston club booked entirely under my father's corporate alias. When I walked through the heavy oak doors, there was no food on the table. Instead, the mahogany surface was flanked by 3 corporate mediation lawyers holding pre-drafted asset waivers. Raymond sat at the head of the table. Amanda and Haley sat to his right. My Uncle Arthur, Raymond's brother, and the family's detached observer sat quietly in the corner, acting as a late-arriving conscience. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table. I unbuttoned my coat and placed my black leather folder in front of me. Amanda smirked, sliding the heavy legal document across the polished wood. "We are doing this the clean way, Brooke," she said. "Sign the asset waiver to release the $100,000 for Haley's wedding, or you'll regret it. We will tie up the estate in litigation for years." I looked at the waiver. I looked at the 3 corporate lawyers whose hourly rates were likely being billed to my father's failing credit. I did not panic. I simply unzipped my folder, looked directly into my father's eyes, and whispered, "Meet my husband." I systematically dealt out the evidence like a casino dealer distributing a lethal hand. First, the timestamped text logs of Amanda's threats and Raymond's demands. Next, I slid the undeniable proof of the bank forgery, complete with Raymond's crude attempt at Julian's signature, directly toward his lead attorney. Finally, I placed the ironclad terms of Julian's spendthrift trust in the center of the table. "This is not revenge," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the soundproof room. "It is accounting." Raymond slammed his fist on the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I will sue you into bankruptcy. I will drag that estate through every court in Massachusetts." His lead corporate attorney picked up the trust document. The man read the forfeiture clause, and I watched the blood drain from his face. The lawyer winced, lowering the paper. "Raymond," the attorney said quietly, "we cannot touch this. The spendthrift provision is legally unassailable. If she signs this waiver, the entire estate is instantly transferred to a conservatory foundation. You have absolutely zero leverage." The silence that followed was absolute. Haley stared at the table, her wedding fund evaporating in real time. Amanda's smirk dissolved into pale shock. Uncle Arthur merely shook his head, finally witnessing the true cost of Raymond's ledgers. I stood up. I pulled the photocopy of Julian's 4-sentence letter from my folder and read it aloud to the silent room. "They will try to collect a debt you do not owe. You are not their ledger, Brooke. I have locked the vault. Close the account." I left the photocopy face up under the glow of the chandelier. I did not look back. I turned on my heel and exited the household forever, closing the heavy oak doors on a line of credit that was permanently denied. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within 24 hours, the corporate mediation firm entirely withdrew their representation to avoid complicity in Raymond's documented fraud. Without the $100,000 extraction, Haley's extravagant historic venue vaporized into thin air. It was swiftly replaced by a stripped-down, $45,000 backyard event funded entirely out of Raymond's rapidly depleting private cash reserves. I did not attend. I blocked all communication channels, severing their access with surgical precision. I changed my phone number, secured my professional networks, and cut them off permanently. Then, I voluntarily triggered the trust's redirection parameters, utilizing a portion of the funds to establish and expand a permanent stained glass preservation apprenticeship in Julian's name. It was an investment in actual legacy, not a subsidy for entitlement. This entire collapse perfectly illustrates the empty wallet's illusion of power. Parasitic family systems thrive on the assumption that you will always value their conditional approval more than your own financial and emotional stability. They project an imposing authority and demand absolute loyalty, carefully masking the fact that their moral and financial accounts are running a massive deficit. But the exact moment their primary target sets an absolute data-driven baseline for reality, the illusion shatters. They collapse into total isolation because their power was never inherently real. It was only ever borrowed against your willingness to pay their debts. When you finally cut the funding, the authority instantly disappears, leaving them with nothing but the reality of their own empty accounts. The next morning, I stood in my quiet kitchen. The early sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the single unwashed coffee mug still resting on the counter. I didn't wash it. I just traced the ceramic rim with my finger, feeling the solid reality of what Julian had left behind. The cold, mechanical efficiency of the retaliation was officially over, leaving only the quiet, serene space where my husband used to be. Setting an ironclad boundary was simply the first honest balance sheet a toxic relationship had ever received, and delivering it was the most profound act of love I could have performed for Julian's memory. I've come to realize that walking away from the people who share your blood is the heaviest transaction you will ever process. It is a lonely audit, but a necessary one. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from their ongoing ledger. I forgive them for who they were, but I will never again finance the crushing cost of knowing them. Healing doesn't mean leaving the door open for future withdrawals. It means locking the vault, securing your assets, and finally learning how to live in the quiet peace of a perfectly balanced life. If this final audit reminded you that quiet people keep the tightest receipts and that blood doesn't buy a subscription to your soul, take this as your final sign. Update your documentation, secure your vault, hit that subscribe button, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and protect your ledger. I will see you in the next case study.